Female Japanese POWs collapsed when they realized Americans weren't going to execute them. August 9th, 1945. Picture this: Yokohama in smoldering ruins, streets choked with smoke and silence. The Emperor's surrender speech still echoing like a death knell. In a dusty holding pen by the docks, dozens of Japanese women, nurses, clerks, auxiliaries, kneel in the dirt, hearts pounding like war drums. They're not soldiers, not really. Just girls handed armbands months ago, told their sacrifice would save an empire. Now they clutch hidden glass shards, poison packets, ready to die with honor. American trucks rumble in. Engines growl like beasts. Boots hit gravel. The women brace for the end, rifles, torture, shame, but the soldiers don't raise weapons. They offer water, cigarettes, blankets. What if the demons you feared handed you life instead? That single, impossible moment didn't just end a war for these women, it obliterated an entire ideology. Raised on Bushido and vicious propaganda, they expected hell on earth. They got humanity in abundance. And in that chasm between terror and kindness, one of World War II's most overlooked stories exploded into being. Keep reading, this isn't just history. It's a revelation that still shakes the soul. These weren't grizzled warriors. Many were schoolgirls mere months earlier, yanked from classrooms, shoved into threadbare uniforms, told their service would bring glory to their families. Clerks in the Imperial Navy typed endless casualty reports until their fingers bled raw, ink staining their skin like blood. Auxiliaries in the Kwantung Army drilled with splintered wooden rifles in dusty school courtyards, chanting slogans of victory while their stomachs growled. Nurses, barely trained, were shipped to Pacific Islands, Saipan, Okinawa, the Philippines, tending broken men in sweltering cave hospitals that reeked of rot, gangrene, and defeat. The smell clung to their hair, their clothes, their nightmares. Officers drilled one message into their skulls: surrender is worse than death. Capture by Americans? Unthinkable. Propaganda reels painted GIs as snarling, pig-faced beasts, rapists, torturers, monsters who'd strip them of dignity and life. The women believed every frame. By August 15th, when Hirohito's trembling voice crackled over radios, "Bear the unbearable," they were already rehearsing their own deaths. Some hid sewing needles to pierce their throats. Others laced ration packets with smuggled poison. They prayed nightly for courage to follow through. To be taken alive was to invite shame beyond endurance. Then the Americans arrived. Not with thunderous rifles, but with trucks heavy with supplies, dust billowing like storm clouds. The women knelt in neat rows, foreheads pressed to the ground, whispering final prayers to ancestors, to the Emperor, to children they'd never see again. Boots crunched closer. This is it. They expected cold rifle barrels against their necks, the metallic click of bolts sliding home. Instead, they heard laughter. Not mocking, but casual, young American. Soldiers joking as they unloaded crates. Voices light as if they were at a picnic, not a surrender. The prisoners dared not lift their eyes, but confusion rippled through them like a shockwave. Where was the execution rhythm? The shouted commands? The violence promised for years? Minutes stretched into eternity. Then hands, steady, not striking, lifted them to their feet. "Stand," an officer said through a translator, voice firm but not cruel. Some resisted, certain it was a trick, a false reprieve before the end. But no blows came. Instead, blankets appeared, soft and clean, bandages, canteens sloshing with water. A medic knelt beside a girl with an infected foot, her skin swollen and pus-filled from weeks without care. He cut away filthy rags with calm precision, applied sterile gauze like it was routine. Another soldier tossed a bundle of cigarettes into the dust, treasure to women who hadn't tasted tobacco in years. Whispers raced through the rows. Delay? Cruel theater? Execution at dawn? Evening fell. Field kitchens rolled out, metal vats gleaming under lantern light. The smell, God, the smell hit like a physical blow. Fat sizzling, bread rising, meat and onions bubbling in cauldrons big as bathtubs. For women accustomed to sour barley water, burned weeds, and the gnawing ache of hunger, it was torture. Propaganda had screamed for years, America starves. Mothers weep as children eat rats. Bread lines stretch for miles. Those lies had kept them going, a twisted comfort. If the enemy suffered too, Japan could endure. Now, standing barefoot in ragged uniforms, they watched soldiers wheel out containers brimming with food so abundant it looked unreal. White bread, soft and fresh, not the hard millet cakes they'd gnawed in hospitals. Coffee steaming, rich with strength. Stew so thick with beef chunks and potatoes that spoons stood upright like flags. The Americans ate first, slurping from tin cups, laughing, alive. One guard offered a cigarette to a nurse. She recoiled, expecting mockery. He just shrugged, smiled. Another tossed an apple core into the dirt, waste, and women gasped. Fresh fruit? In 1945? When the prisoners were finally beckoned forward, hesitation froze them solid. Eyes darted, waiting for someone to move first. At last, an older auxiliary, once a hospital worker, lifted a piece of bread with trembling hands. It nearly crumbled. She bit, chewed, waited for poison, for death. Nothing, no shots, no jeering. The bread was warm, soft, impossibly sweet. Tears welled as she devoured it. Others followed, timid bites, then ravenous gulps. Nurses who'd rationed grams of rice to dying soldiers now held plates heavier than their families ate in a week. One wrote in her diary later, "I waited for the bullet with every bite. When it never came, I broke, sobbing over stew, tears mixing with gravy." Another confessed, "The sugar in the coffee made me gasp." It was too much, too real. That night, beneath the steady hum of electric lanterns, lights that didn't flicker like Japan's blacked-out cities, they lay on blankets softer than anything they'd known in years. No gunfire cracked the silence. Just generators purring, the lingering scent of stew. Sleep crept into exhausted bodies, but a terrifying thought took root. If they're not demons, what else was a lie? If survival was possible, if kindness was real, then the Empire's promises were crumbling. The moment of capture hadn't ended in death. It ended in confusion. And confusion was the first crack in an ideology that had seemed indestructible. The smell came next, sharp and clean. Antiseptic, alcohol, hope. White canvas tents rose at the compound's edge, glowing under electric lamps that hummed through the night. Japanese field hospitals? Dark, overcrowded caves where shortages dictated every cut, every scream. Morphine? Gone years ago. Instruments? Boiled over open flames. Limbs blackened with gangrene, buried in shallow graves by nurses' own hands. That was their world. Scarcity, decay, despair. These American tents? A different universe. Glass vials of penicillin, the enemy myth, glistened like jewels. Injections given casually, not just for life-threatening wounds, but for fevers, headaches, toothaches. Sulfa powder sprinkled on infected cuts with calm precision. Pregnant auxiliaries, expecting only shame, received gentle exams, prenatal vitamins, promises of monitoring. TB patients, who in Japan would cough blood into rags until death, were isolated in clean tents, bedding changed daily, meals fortified with milk and meat. Medics sketched lung diagrams, explaining in broken Japanese what was happening inside their bodies. A nurse with a gangrenous leg, certain of amputation, watched swelling vanish in days. Another, bedridden with pneumonia, breathed easier after sulfa drugs and hot broth. Japanese nurses took secret notes, memorizing procedures, pride battling honesty. One admitted later, the shame was unbearable. Our men died on tables without a chance, while enemies saved us with drugs we were told didn't exist. Another wept. They treated us like humans. Our own government left us to rot. Kindness wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror, reflecting a Japan that had abandoned its own. In the sterile glow of those tents, ideology cracked into chasms. To be treated not as animals, not even as enemies, but as human beings deserving care, was something many had never experienced from their own officers. The Empire had lied. The Americans showed truth more powerful than any bayonet. Bara then came the clothes, a dream they didn't dare believe. For days, they'd slept under threadbare blankets scavenged from ruins, uniforms reduced to rags barely clinging to their bodies. Undergarments? Patched until they were strings. Shoes? Worn through, forcing barefoot marches over gravel and broken stone. Their skin carried months of grime, sweat, smoke. Then bundles arrived, olive drab uniforms, neatly folded. Clean cotton socks, sturdy leather boots with indestructible soles, new undergarments. Women slipped them on like they were trespassing in another life. One laced boots and wept. "My brother died in Manchuria. He never had shoes like this." Another pressed socks to her cheek, remembering frostbitten winters with newspaper-wrapped feet. The abundance felt cruel because it forced admission. America's resources were limitless compared to Japan's starvation. CKs followed, wooden, clean electric lights glowing from ceilings. A miracle. Japan's cities had been plunged into blackout darkness for years. Now, in defeat, they entered rooms brighter than Tokyo since 1941. Showers hissed hot water. Immediate. Endless. Toilets flushed with a handle's press, whisking waste away like magic. Gas stoves lit instantly, no choking coal smoke. Guards tossed soap like it was nothing, distributed boots without fanfare. To Americans, this was normal. To the women? Accusation. If this is ordinary for the enemy, what was our superior empire? Each light bulb was a betrayal. Each clean blanket a reminder of propaganda's lies. That night, wrapped in fresh uniforms, sleeping on bunks warmer than anything in years, they whispered in the dark, not of execution, but of confusion. The empire promised hell, delivered comfort beyond imagination. In that gap, their world crumbled further. The guards broke them most. Young men, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, Saipan survivors, had seen comrades torn apart by artillery, ships consumed by fire, kamikaze pilots screaming from the sky. They had every reason to hate, yet they carried water for the sick, cantons sloshing, offered chocolate to children, foil crinkling, guided mothers to food lines, explaining dishes in broken Japanese. Some fumbled arigato, laughing at mangled accents, intent sincere. One soldier, barely 20, showed a photo. "My wife. My son." Grinned, pointing to the baby, then himself, a silent declaration. "I'm human too." Most shocking? Apologies for slow food lines, for late blankets, for dust choking them on hot days. Apologies from men who owed nothing, who'd earned vengeance. One woman whispered, "When did a Japanese officer ever apologize?" They'd braced for beatings, humiliation, the casual cruelty of power. Some expected rape, discard. Instead, guards averted eyes respectfully, treated them with restraint so careful it embarrassed. Cigarettes offered freely. Extra bread slipped into hands. Bows of thanks waved off. Fanatics hissed in barracks, "Trick!" Masks. But weeks passed. No night executions. No punishments without cause. Smiles returned, hesitant, then real. To be spared was one thing. To be treated as though they mattered? That was unbearable clarity. The enemy showed more humanity than the empire in its final days. Abundance hit hardest at Yokohama Harbor. Women marched under guard to the scarred docks, ruins beside new American-built warehouses, white walls, roofs lined with electric lights glowing even in daylight. Cranes taller than temples swung containers with effortless precision. Grain poured into silos vast enough for provinces. Refrigerated trucks rumbled, doors slamming over sides of beef, crates of milk bottles. The smell of fresh meat, absent for years, made one prisoner sob, remembering her brother's skeletal body in winter, family boiling weeds while officers promised victory. Warehouses stretched crates floor to ceiling, stamped with bold American logos. Canned peaches in syrup so sweet it clung to fingers. Powdered milk by the ton. Chocolate bars in pyramids taller than the women. Radios crackled with foreign music before they learned to tune them. The shock wasn't just the quantity, it was the casualness. Half-eaten meals discarded. Food that would have fed villages for a week tossed into bins. Broken tools? Replaced, not mended. Worn blankets? Given to prisoners like trash. No boasting, no arrogance. To Americans, this was routine, the bare minimum. For women raised on Japanese superiority and American decay, it was devastating. One clerk whispered, "We went 4 years without sugar. They throw away candy wrappers." Each can of peaches, each humming refrigerator was a silent accusation. Silence gave way to whispers. Some admitted, "I couldn't imagine such wealth." Others clung to pride. Unsustainable. "They'll collapse. but ships kept unloading. Proof marched relentlessly. America wasn't starving. It was overflowing. The last illusions of empire swept away like dust. Transformation came slowly, like ink bleeding across paper. After food, clothes, medicine, shelter, Americans introduced something trivial yet profound: words. Crisp newspapers arrived, ink still fresh. Pamphlets, books translated into Japanese. At first, women recoiled, propaganda to twist minds. They hid papers, warned of mockery, but curiosity gnawed like hunger. One nurse unfolded a paper in secret, gasped. Others gathered. Columns clashed. One praised Truman, another condemned atomic bombs. Protests, dissent, printed openly. In Japan, a whisper against the emperor meant prison. Newspapers were state weapons, uniform lies. Here, disagreement was strength, not chaos. English lessons followed. Chalkboards in camps. American teachers, soldiers, civilians stood before rows of women repeating bread, water, freedom, hope. Sounds awkward yet liberating. For women ordered to silence, to chant slogans, learning the enemy's tongue felt like escaping into a larger world. Then letters. American families sent soap, knitted scarves, postcards. Prisoners invited to write thanks. Absurd, why care about enemy words? But replies came weeks later, warm, curious. Photos of untouched houses, gardens bursting, kitchens stocked. Children's drawings, stick figures holding Japanese and American flags, as if war never existed. One letter, "We hope you are safe." A woman sobbed. Enemies wrote with gentleness. Another, "Tell us about your home." Human connection, undeniable. Not forced. Not propaganda, just people. The women had entered believing power came from brutality, authority beyond question. Loyalty demanded silence. Now they saw democracy alive, through words, dissent, letters across oceans. Ideology's walls, stronger than barbed wire, crumbled in ink and paper, in pencil scratches on cheap stationery. In realizing their silenced voices were heard. Late 1946, repatriation. The women boarded ships, faces fuller, shoulders straighter, eyes holding sorrow and hope. They'd arrived hollow-eyed, suicidal, certain each hour brought death. Now they were witnesses to something enduring, a society of freedom, abundance, humanity. The voyage home was quiet, sea endless. They huddled on deck, whispering memories, the first meal breaking fear, clean uniforms like kindness, letters teaching enemies could be friends, doctors with dignity, guards with children's photos, libraries encouraging thought, not obedience, each memory unreal against propaganda's lies. But together, they formed truth. They knew Japan awaited in ruins, Tokyo burned to ash, villages hungry, families shattered. The emperor, once divine, now human. Yet these women carried seeds, strength in kindness, not brutality, abundance from freedom, not conquest, dignity where humanity trumped obedience. Some became teachers, telling thin, restless children of electric lights in every town, hot water from taps, newspapers arguing without fear. They taught democracy not as theory, but lived experience, surviving as captives when their government deemed them expendable. Others entered politics, pushing reforms for equality, participation, a Japan where none were silenced. A few immigrated, married former guards or civilians who'd sent care packages. Enemy became family. In later years, their testimony filled history books echoing decades. They remembered captivity not as punishment, but transformation. America's greatest victory wasn't atomic bombs or steel fleets, it was mercy. The empire promised savagery, delivered lies. The women expected execution, rehearsed death until survival felt impossible. Yet survival came through discovery. What collapsed wasn't their bodies under rifle fire, but illusions shackling their souls. In that collapse, rebirth. When they stepped onto Japanese soil, they carried little in hands but much in hearts. Lessons of freedom, abundance, humanity, seeds planted deep. In time, those seeds grew. From ashes, a new Japan bloomed, and it began with a canteen of water, and a lie that died in the dust.